Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
For 10 years, I lived with the belief that my sister was gone forever. My parents told me she died in a car accident when I was 16, and I had no reason to question them. We held a funeral, complete with a casket and a gravestone, and I grieved the loss of the sister who had always been my partner in crime. The grief was unbearable at first. I spent countless nights crying myself to sleep, missing her laugh, her advice, and the way she could always make me feel better no matter how bad things got. Over time, the sharp edges of the pain dulled, but the ache of her absence never went away. So you can imagine my shock when, 10 years later, I discovered she wasn't dead at all. She was alive, and in prison. It all started on an ordinary weekend visit to my parents' house. I had been helping them clean out the attic, going through boxes of old memories when I stumbled across a stack of letters tied together with twine. At first, I thought they were just more family correspondence. But then I noticed the return address, a state correctional facility. My stomach flipped as I read the sender's name. It was my sister's handwriting. Her familiar scrawl jumped out at me, a ghost from the past that hit me like a punch to the gut. I quickly untied the bundle and opened the first letter, my hands trembling. The date on the letter was from 8 years ago, 2 years after her supposed death. I read the words in disbelief. Dear Mom and Dad, I hope this letter finds you well. I'm doing my best to get through each day here. It's not easy, but I know I have to pay for my mistakes. I couldn't read anymore. My heart was racing, and my mind was spinning with questions. What mistakes? Why was she in prison? And why would my parents lie to me about something so huge? I rushed downstairs, the bundle of letters clutched in my hands. My mom was in the kitchen, humming to herself as she cleaned. When she saw my face, her smile faltered. What's wrong? She asked, drying her hands on a towel. I held up the letters. These, I said, my voice trembling. What are these? Why do I have letters from my sister if she's supposed to be dead? Her face went pale, and she reached for the counter as if steadying herself. Where did you find those? She whispered. In the attic, I said. Why does it matter? What's going on, Mom? She didn't answer. Instead, she called out for my dad, her voice shaky. Can you come here? Now. My dad appeared a moment later, looking confused. When he saw the letters in my hand, his expression changed. He looked at my mom, then back at me. We need to talk, he said. No kidding, I replied, my voice sharp. We sat down at the dining table, the tension so thick I could barely breathe. My dad began to speak, his voice slow and deliberate. She's alive, he admitted. Your sister. She's in prison. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, I couldn't process them. Prison? I repeated. Why? What happened? My mom jumped in, her voice defensive. She made some bad choices. She got involved with the wrong people and things spiraled out of control. That doesn't explain why you told me she was dead. I shouted. My dad sighed, rubbing his temples. She asked us not to tell you. She was ashamed of what she'd done and didn't want you to know. She thought it would be easier for you to move on if you believed she was gone. Easier? I said, my voice rising. You think it was easier for me to grieve her death for 10 years than to know the truth? My mom started crying, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. The betrayal was too fresh, too raw. My world had just been turned upside down, and I didn't know who to trust anymore. As I sat there, staring at the bundle of letters on the table, a million thoughts raced through my mind. My parents had lied to me for a decade, letting me mourn a sister who was still alive. My sister had made a choice to shut me out of her life, leaving me to grieve alone. I didn't know what to feel: anger, sadness, betrayal, or relief. But one thing was clear. I needed to find out the full story, and I wasn't going to let this go. I sat on the attic floor, surrounded by dust and shadows, with the letters fanned out in front of me. My hands trembled as I picked up the first envelope, the familiar loops of my sister's handwriting pulling me back in time. It was like she had reached out from the grave, or rather, the lie my parents had constructed. The first letter was dated 8 years ago, just 2 years after her supposed death. My heart pounded as I unfolded the paper, the creases so sharp it felt like they could cut. The letter started simply. Dear Mom and Dad, I hope this letter finds you well. I miss you both so much. Every day here feels like a lifetime, but I know this is where I'm supposed to be. I need to pay for my mistakes. Please tell me you've forgiven me. That's all I think about. I read on, the words painting a picture of a woman I barely recognized. My sister, fierce, rebellious and stubborn, sounded broken. She wrote about her regret, how lonely she was, and how she hoped my parents were okay. But the part that hit me hardest was at the end. Please, don't tell anyone, especially my name. She deserves better than to know where I am or what I've done. Let her move on. I can't bear the thought of her hating me. The letter slipped from my hands, landing softly on the floor. My breath caught in my throat, a whirlwind of emotions swirling inside me. She thought I would hate her? She thought it would be better for me to believe she was gone? My grief over the years had been so intense, so consuming, and she had willingly let me carry it. All for the sake of my happiness. One by one, I read through the letters, each one peeling back another layer of the decade-long lie. My sister had written regularly, describing the monotony of prison life, her attempts at rehabilitation, and her growing regret for the choices that had landed her there. But there were no specifics about what she had done, only vague mentions of mistakes and poor decisions. In one letter from 5 years ago, she wrote, "I think about my name every day. I wonder if she's happy, if she's made something of her life. I hope she knows how much I love her, even if she never hears it from me again. I just want her to have the life I threw away." Tears streamed down my face as I read those words. I had spent years missing her, mourning her, and she had been alive all along, thinking about me in the shadows of a prison cell. But as much as her letters were filled with regret, they also begged for my parents' secrecy. "Promise me," she wrote in nearly every letter. "Don't let her know. It's better this way." Was it really better? Did she think I wouldn't have forgiven her? By the time I reached the most recent letter, dated just a few months ago, I was shaking with anger and confusion. The years of lies, the pain of losing her, and the betrayal of being kept in the dark, all of it boiled to the surface. The final letter was shorter than the others, almost rushed. "I'm doing better. I found a routine that helps me get through the days, and I'm working toward my release. It's not far off now, and I can't wait to finally leave this place behind. But I'm scared. Scared of what comes next, scared of what you'll think of me, scared of whether my name will ever forgive me if she finds out. I'll understand if she doesn't. I'll understand if you don't either." Her words lingered in my mind long after I folded the letter and placed it back in its envelope. She was afraid. Afraid of what I would think, of what life would look like once she was free. But what about me? For 10 years, I had lived under the shadow of her death. How was I supposed to forgive her for that? I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't sit with this alone. I needed answers. The anger bubbled up again as I stormed downstairs, the bundle of letters clutched in my hands. My parents were in the living room, sitting comfortably as if their lie hadn't just unraveled upstairs. "What is this?" I demanded, holding up the letters. They both froze, their faces draining of color. My mom looked like she might faint, and my dad's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "Where did you find those?" my mom asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "In the attic," I said, my voice shaking. "What is going on? Why do I have letters from my sister's name, if she's supposed to be dead?" My dad reached for my mom's hand, his own trembling. "We can explain," he said weakly. "You'd better," I said, my voice rising. "Because right now, this feels like the biggest betrayal of my entire life." They tried to calm me down, but the truth was out there now, and there was no way I was letting them brush it aside. The letters had shattered the illusion of the past 10 years, and I wasn't going to stop until I understood why they had lied to me. About her, about everything. The pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to come together, but the picture they painted was more devastating than anything I could have imagined. The tension in the room was suffocating as I stood in the doorway, clutching the bundle of letters like evidence at a trial. My mom looked up from the book she was reading, her face instantly draining of color when she saw what I held in my hands. "Where did you find those?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "In the attic," I replied, holding them up. "What is this? Why do I have letters from my sister's name, if she's supposed to be dead?" Her expression crumpled, and she reached for the arm of the chair as if to steady herself. I can explain," she stammered, but her words faltered. My dad walked into the room, his face showing confusion that quickly shifted to alarm when he saw the scene unfolding. He glanced at my mom and then at the letters, his face turning pale. "We thought it was for the best," my mom blurted out, breaking the silence. Her voice was trembling, her hands twisting together nervously. "She made mistakes. Terrible mistakes. And we didn't want you to be dragged into it. For the best," I repeated, my voice rising. "You let me believe she was dead. Do you have any idea what that did to me? My dad took a deep breath, stepping closer to the sofa where my mom sat. We didn't know how to tell you, he said quietly, and she asked us to keep it a secret. She thought it would be easier for you if you didn't know the truth. Easier? I said, my voice shaking. Do you have any idea what it's like to grieve someone you love, to think they're gone forever? You let me go through all of that while knowing it was a lie. My mom started crying, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sympathy. I had spent years drowning in grief, and now I was supposed to feel bad for them because they didn't know how to tell me the truth? My dad tried to explain, but the more he talked, the angrier I became. It wasn't just about you, he said. Your sister was ashamed of what she had done. She didn't want you to see her like that, so you decided to stage her death instead? I snapped. You had a funeral, a gravestone. You let me think I was visiting her grave for 10 years. We thought it was the only way, my mom said through her tears. She begged us not to tell you. She wanted you to move on, to have a normal life without the shadow of what she did hanging over you. I shook my head, disbelief coursing through me. You didn't give me the chance to make that decision for myself. You stole 10 years from me. 10 years I could have spent knowing my sister was alive. My dad sank into the chair opposite me, his face etched with guilt. We were trying to protect you, he said. But we realize now that we made a mistake. A mistake? I repeated, my voice trembling with rage. A mistake is forgetting to set an alarm or misplacing your keys. This was a deliberate lie, a decade-long lie. You didn't just take away my sister. You took away my trust in you. For a moment, the room was silent except for the sound of my mom's quiet sobs. I could see the pain in their faces, but it wasn't enough to calm the storm raging inside me. I felt betrayed, like the foundation of my entire life had been pulled out from under me. She was your daughter too, I said finally, my voice quieter now but no less sharp. How could you just erase her like that? How could you pretend she didn't exist? She's the one who asked us to, my dad said. She didn't want you to know what she'd done. And we thought it was what she wanted, and you didn't think to question that? I shot back. You didn't think maybe I deserved the truth? We thought we were doing the right thing, my mom whispered, but I see now that we were wrong. We were so wrong. I stood up, clutching the letters to my chest. I can't do this right now, I said, my voice breaking. I need time to process this. Don't expect me to forgive you anytime soon. My mom reached out as if to stop me, but I turned away. I needed space, distance from the lies and the betrayal. As I walked out of the house and into the cool evening air, I felt like I couldn't breathe. My sister was alive. She had been alive all this time, and my parents had stolen that knowledge from me. I didn't know what to feel: anger, relief, sadness, or some combination of all three. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let them keep me in the dark any longer. The next step was finding her. It felt like hours, though it was probably closer to 30 minutes, of back and forth arguing before my parents finally gave in and told me the truth. The exhaustion and guilt on their faces were evident as they sat across from me in the living room. My dad leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together as if he were praying. My mom sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, her face streaked with tears. Your sister always had a rebellious streak, my dad began. You know that. But it got worse when she was in her 20s. She started hanging out with the wrong people, making reckless choices. We tried to intervene, but she wouldn't listen. What kind of choices? I asked, my voice sharp. She got involved in fraud. My mom said quietly, her voice shaking. Identity theft, credit card schemes, things that ruined people's lives. We didn't know the full extent of it until it was too late. My mind reeled as I tried to reconcile this version of my sister with the woman I had idolized growing up. She'd always been the one to push boundaries, but I never imagined it would lead her down a path like this. Eventually, she was arrested. My dad continued. The charges were serious. Fraud, theft, conspiracy. It wasn't just a slap on the wrist. When the sentencing came down, it was 10 years in prison. I sat back, stunned. 10 years? He nodded. She was devastated. She begged us not to tell anyone. She didn't want her mistakes to reflect on the family. And she especially didn't want you to know. So you just lied? I asked, my voice rising. You staged her death? Do you have any idea how insane that sounds? My mom burst into tears. We didn't know what else to do. We were ashamed, and she was ashamed. We thought it would be better for everyone if we pretended she was gone. You had a funeral, I said, disbelief coloring every word. A gravestone. You let me grieve her for 10 years. We thought it would help you move on, my dad said softly. We thought it would be easier for you to live your life without the burden of knowing. Easier? I repeated, incredulous. You think it was easier to believe my sister was dead? To visit her grave? To carry that grief every single day? How could you think that was better? She didn't want you to be ashamed of her, my mom sobbed. She loved you so much, and she didn't want you to see her like that. She thought she was protecting you. Protecting me? I said, my anger rising. By taking away my choice? By lying to me for a decade? You didn't protect me. You betrayed me. Both of you. My dad looked down, unable to meet my gaze. You're right, he said finally. We made the wrong choice. But at the time, it felt like the only option. We were scared, embarrassed. We didn't want to face the questions or the judgment. And what about her? I asked. You just erased her. You pretended she didn't exist. Did she even want that? Or was that your idea? She agreed to it, my mom said. She begged us to keep it a secret. She didn't want you to know. She thought she was sparing you. Sparing me from what? I demanded. From loving her? From supporting her? From being there for her when she needed me most? They didn't have an answer for that. The room fell silent except for the sound of my mom's quiet sobs. I stared at the bundle of letters on the coffee table, my mind racing with questions I couldn't begin to untangle. The sister I had mourned for 10 years was alive, but the memories of her death felt just as real as the truth now sitting in front of me. You didn't think I had the right to decide how I felt about this? I asked quietly, my voice trembling. You didn't think I deserved to know the truth? We thought we were doing what was best, my dad said weakly. Well, you weren't, I said, standing up. You didn't just take away my sister. You took away my trust in you. And I don't know if I can ever get that back. My mom reached out as if to stop me, but I stepped back, shaking my head. I need time to process this, I said. Don't call me until I'm ready to talk. I picked up the letters and walked out the door, my chest tight and my mind spinning. As I sat in my car, clutching the letters in my lap, I felt an overwhelming mix of emotions. Anger, betrayal, sadness, and a faint glimmer of hope. My sister was alive. She was out there, somewhere, and I had a chance to reconnect with her. But how? How could I even begin to approach someone who had willingly let me believe she was dead? And could I forgive her for the role she had played in this lie? I didn't have the answers yet, but one thing was certain. I couldn't let this end here. I needed to find her. I needed to hear her side of the story. And I needed to decide, for myself, if this relationship was worth rebuilding. That night, sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, the whirlwind of emotions pulled me back under. My mind kept replaying the revelations from earlier in the day, each piece of the puzzle creating an even more complicated picture. My sister, alive, in prison, and hidden from me for 10 years, wasn't just a shock. It was a betrayal I couldn't begin to unpack. Anger bubbled up as I thought about all the milestones she had missed. She wasn't there when I graduated high school or college, wasn't there to offer advice during my first heartbreak, and wasn't there to celebrate the wins that were supposed to be ours to share. Instead, I had spent a decade mourning her, believing she was gone, while she sat behind bars, choosing to keep me in the dark. But along with the anger came guilt. Had I done something to make her think she couldn't come to me? Did she truly believe I would have hated her for her mistakes? Those questions kept me awake, gnawing at the edges of my mind. By the time the first light of dawn crept through my window, I had made a decision. I needed to hear her side of the story. I sifted through the bundle of letters again, looking for the most recent one. It was dated just a few months ago, and the words felt raw and rushed compared to the earlier ones. I'm trying to make peace with everything, but it's hard. I think about my name every day. I wonder if she would hate me if she knew the truth. Maybe it's better this way. At least she doesn't have to see me like this. I stared at those lines for a long time, my emotions a tangled mess. Did she really think so little of me? Did she not know how much I would have done to help her, even from a distance? The address of the correctional facility was printed clearly at the top of the letter, and for a moment, I hesitated. What if reaching out opened wounds that couldn't heal? What if she didn't want to see me? But then I thought about how I'd already lost her once. This time, I had a chance to do something about it. Later that day, I sat at my kitchen table, a blank sheet of paper in front of me. Writing to her felt strange, almost surreal, like I was reaching out to someone I barely knew anymore. What do you say to a sister who has been missing from your life for a decade? I started with the basics, my hand trembling as I wrote. Dear sister's name, I know the truth. Mom and Dad finally told me everything. I found your letters, and I know you've been in prison. I can't begin to describe how I feel right now. Angry, sad, confused, but mostly, I just miss you. The words poured out slowly at first, then faster as the emotions took over. I told her how much I had grieved for her, how devastated I was when I thought she was gone, and how betrayed I felt by the lie. But I also told her that I wanted to see her, to hear her side of the story. I want to understand, I wrote. I want to know why you made the choices you did, why you thought I wouldn't be there for you. If you're willing, I'd like to visit you. Please let me know if that's okay. I read the letter over a dozen times before finally sealing it in an envelope. My heart pounded as I addressed it to the facility, imagining her reaction when she received it. Would she be angry? Relieved? Would she even respond? At the post office, I hesitated again, the envelope feeling heavy in my hands. Part of me was terrified of what opening this door would mean. Would I find the sister I had loved and missed for so long? Or would she be someone entirely different? But as scared as I was, the thought of doing nothing was worse. I had spent 10 years in the dark, mourning a sister who wasn't truly gone. Now that I knew the truth, I couldn't let another decade slip by without trying to rebuild what we had lost. I dropped the letter into the mailbox, the sound of it hitting the metal bottom echoing in my mind. It was out of my hands now, literally. All I could do was wait. The next few days were torture. Every time the mail arrived, I found myself holding my breath, hoping for a reply. I went through every possible scenario in my head, imagining what she might say, what she might feel. Would she be angry that I had reached out? Would she be grateful? Would she ignore me entirely? When a week passed with no response, doubt began to creep in. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe she didn't want me in her life anymore. But then, on the 10th day, an envelope arrived with the same correctional facility address printed in the corner. My heart raced as I tore it open, the paper inside feeling heavy with anticipation. Dear my name, I can't believe you found out. I'm so sorry for everything. For the lies, for the pain I've caused, for making you think I was gone. I was trying to protect you, but now I see that I just hurt you more. If you want to visit, I'd like that. I've missed you more than I can say. Her words brought tears to my eyes. For the first time in 10 years, I felt like I had a piece of her back. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but this was a start. 2 weeks after I sent the letter, a reply arrived. The sight of her handwriting on the envelope made my heart skip a beat. I tore it open with trembling hands, the words inside washing over me like a tidal wave of emotions. Dear my name, I never thought I'd hear from you. I've missed you more than I can say. I was so surprised to get your letter, and I've been sitting here, trying to figure out how to respond. I'm sorry for everything, for the lies, for letting you think I was gone. If you still want to see me, I'd like that. Please let me know when you want to visit. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of 10 years of silence. I read the letter over and over, trying to imagine the sister who had written it. She wasn't just a memory anymore. She was real, alive, and waiting to see me. I scheduled the visit for the following week, but the days leading up to it were a blur of nerves and anticipation. I couldn't stop wondering what it would be like to see her again. Would she be the same person I remembered? Or would the years in prison have changed her beyond recognition? Walking into the correctional facility for the first time was surreal. The stark white walls, the sterile smell, the sound of doors clanging shut behind me. It all felt overwhelming. I clutched the visitor's pass in my hand, my heart pounding as a guard escorted me to the visitation room. The room was filled with rows of small tables and chairs, separated by glass partitions in some areas and open seating in others. I sat down at one of the tables, my hands clammy as I waited. Each second felt like an eternity. When she finally walked in, my breath caught in my throat. She looked older, thinner, and more tired than I had ever seen her. Her once vibrant face was lined with stress, and her hair was shorter, streaked with gray. But it was undeniably her, my sister, standing just a few feet away. "Hey," she said softly, her voice carrying the same warmth I remembered from all those years ago. For a moment, I didn't know what to do. I wanted to hug her, to scream at her, to cry, to do all of it at once. Instead, I just sat down and stared at her, my emotions tangled and raw. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice shaking. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she looked down at her hands. "I was ashamed," she admitted. "I didn't want you to see me like this. I didn't want you to know what I had done." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Do you have any idea what it was like to think you were gone?" I said, my voice cracking. To grieve for you every single day? I know, she said, her tears spilling over. And I'm so sorry. I thought I was protecting you, but I see now that I only hurt you more. We sat there in silence for a moment, the weight of the past 10 years pressing down on us. She looked at me with so much regret in her eyes that it almost made my anger fade. Almost? I don't even know where to start, I said finally. Me neither, she admitted. But I'm glad you're here. I've wanted to see you for so long, but I didn't know how to reach out. I didn't think you'd want to hear from me. I didn't think I'd ever get the chance, I said. Mom and Dad made sure of that. Her expression darkened. They were just trying to protect you. I told them not to tell you. That wasn't their decision to make, I said firmly. It wasn't yours either. She nodded, wiping her eyes. You're right. I made a lot of mistakes. Not just the ones that got me here, but the ones that kept me away from you. As the minutes turned into an hour, we started to talk. Really talk. She told me about the choices that led to her arrest, about the people she trusted who betrayed her, and about the moment she realized she couldn't escape the consequences of her actions. I thought I could fix it, she said. I thought I could make it right before anyone found out. But everything just spiraled out of control. Why didn't you call me? I asked. Why didn't you let me help you? I didn't want you to get dragged into my mess, she said. You were doing so well, college, your future. I didn't want to be the reason you lost all of that. Her words stung, but they also made sense in a twisted way. She had spent years protecting me in her own misguided way, even if it meant breaking my heart in the process. When the visit ended, we both stood awkwardly, unsure of what to do next. I wanted to hug her, but the guards were already signaling that it was time to go. Will you come back? She asked, her voice tentative. I nodded, my throat tight. Yeah, I will. As I walked out of the prison, the emotions I had been holding back finally broke through. I sat in my car and cried, overwhelmed by everything that had happened. She wasn't the same person I had lost all those years ago, but she wasn't a stranger either. She was my sister, and despite everything, I wanted to try to rebuild what we had lost. The first visit was overwhelming, but it opened a door I never thought I'd walk through again. After 10 years of believing my sister was gone, I was finally getting to know her again, though this version of her was a stranger in many ways. Over the next few months, I visited her as often as I could. Each time, we peeled back another layer of the story, slowly filling in the gaps of the last decade. She was honest, even when it hurt, and I appreciated that more than I could say. It all started when I was desperate, she admitted during one visit. I had just moved out on my own, and I thought I had everything figured out. But then the bills piled up, and I fell behind. I was too proud to ask for help, so I started looking for shortcuts. What kind of shortcuts? I asked, though I already knew the answer wouldn't be good. She hesitated, then sighed. I met a guy who said he could help me make some quick cash. It seemed harmless at first, just using some fake credit cards to buy gift cards and resell them. But then it escalated. He started asking me to open accounts in other people's names, steal their information. I knew it was wrong, but by the time I realized how deep I was in, it was too late. She told me about the night everything came crashing down. She had been running one of their schemes at a department store when the police showed up. I thought I could talk my way out of it, she said, shaking her head. But they had everything: bank records, surveillance footage, even text messages from me to the guy who roped me into it. I was completely screwed. Hearing the details made my stomach turn. And you never thought to call me? Or Mom and Dad? She looked down at her hands, picking at her fingernails, a nervous habit she'd had since we were kids. I was too ashamed, she said. I didn't want you to see me like that. I thought if I could just get through it on my own, I could come back and pretend it never happened. But you didn't get through it, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. You went to prison, and you let us think you were dead. Do you have any idea what that did to me? Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I felt guilty for being so harsh. But the hurt was still raw, even after all these months. I know I hurt you, she said, her voice breaking, and I'll never forgive myself for that. But I thought I was protecting you. I thought if you didn't know, you'd be better off. Her words sat heavy in the air between us. I wanted to believe that her intentions had been good, but part of me still felt betrayed. How could she think it was better to let me grieve her than to let me help her? You could have told me the truth, I said finally. I would have been there for you, no matter what. I know, she said, wiping her eyes. I see that now. But back then, I was so caught up in my own shame that I couldn't see anything else. We sat in silence for a while, the hum of the visitation room filling the space between us. I watched her, trying to reconcile the person in front of me with the sister I had idolized growing up. She wasn't the same, but then again, neither was I. I've changed, she said after a while. I'm not the same person I was back then. I've worked so hard to turn my life around, even in here. I just hope I can prove that to you. Her words were earnest, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer of the sister I had lost. The one who always had my back, the one who could make me laugh even on my worst days. As the visits continued, she started sharing more about her life behind bars. She talked about the programs she had joined, the friendships she had made, and the goals she had set for herself once she was released. It's not easy, she said one day, but I've learned a lot about myself in here. I've learned what matters and what I need to let go of. Like the guy who got you into this mess? I asked, raising an eyebrow. She laughed, a sound I hadn't heard in years. Oh, trust me, he's long gone. I don't even think about him anymore. Hearing her laugh was like a balm to my soul, but the wounds of the past were still there. I wanted to move forward, to rebuild what we had lost, but it wasn't something that could happen overnight. Despite the progress we were making, there were still moments of tension. She was open about her regret, but I couldn't help feeling like there were pieces of the story she was holding back, things she was too afraid to say. One day, I asked her directly, "Is there anything else I don't know? Anything you're still hiding?" She looked at me for a long time, her expression unreadable. "I don't think so," she said finally. "But if I remember something, you'll be the first to know." It wasn't the answer I wanted, but it was enough for now. For the first time in years, we were talking, and that was more than I ever thought I'd have again. As I left the prison that day, I felt a strange mix of emotions: hope, anger, sadness, and love, all tangled together. Rebuilding our relationship wasn't going to be easy, but it was worth fighting for. She wasn't just my sister anymore. She was a survivor, someone who had been through hell and was still standing. And for the first time in 10 years, I felt like we were standing together. It didn't take long for my parents to find out I had visited my sister. The moment they heard about it, they called me, their voices a mixture of panic and anger. "Why would you do this?" my mom demanded. "We told you to let it go." "Let it go?" I repeated, incredulous. "You're seriously telling me to let go of my sister? After you lied to me for 10 years? Do you hear yourselves?" "She didn't want you to know," my dad said, trying to keep his voice calm. "We were honoring her wishes." "No," I shot back. "You were honoring your shame. You erased her from my life and acted like you were doing me a favor. Do you have any idea how much pain that caused me?" My mom was crying by this point, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. The betrayal I felt was still too fresh. The argument escalated, dragging up years of buried resentment and unanswered questions. My dad insisted they had done what they thought was right, but the more they talked, the clearer it became that their decision had been more about saving face than protecting me. We didn't want the family to judge her, or us, my mom admitted through tears. What would people say if they knew our daughter was in prison? We were trying to protect everyone, including you. "Protect me?" I said, shaking my head. "You didn't protect me. You broke me. You let me think I had lost her forever. And now you want me to act like that's okay?" My dad's face hardened. "We made a difficult choice. You don't understand how hard it was for us, and you don't understand how hard it was for me to grieve her," I replied. "Or how hard it is now to realize it was all a lie. You stole my chance to support her, to help her through this. You stole my chance to decide how I felt about her mistakes." The conversation ended in a stalemate, with neither side willing to back down. My parents were furious that I had reopened what they saw as a closed chapter, and I was furious that they couldn't see how wrong they had been. From that point on, our relationship became strained to the breaking point. Family dinners, once lively and full of laughter, turned into tense affairs where no one dared mention my sister. My parents acted like the visits weren't happening, and I refused to pretend she didn't exist. One evening, during an especially awkward dinner, my mom finally snapped. "Why do you keep doing this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why can't you just let her go?" "Because she's my sister," I said, staring her down. and you had no right to take her away from me. If you want to pretend she doesn't exist, that's on you. But I'm done pretending. My dad stood up, his face red with frustration. You're tearing this family apart, he said. No, I replied calmly. You tore this family apart the moment you lied to me. I'm just trying to fix what's left. As the months went on, the divide between us only grew. My parents couldn't, or wouldn't, acknowledge that what they had done was wrong, and I couldn't forgive them for keeping such a massive secret from me. Holidays became smaller and more awkward, with everyone walking on eggshells around the subject of my sister. My cousins and extended family, who had also been told the story of her death, were starting to hear the truth through whispers and rumors. Some of them were understanding, but others sided with my parents, saying I should have left the past in the past. But I couldn't, and wouldn't, do that. Every visit with my sister reminded me why I was fighting so hard to rebuild our relationship. She was trying to piece her life back together, and I wasn't going to let her do it alone just because it made my parents uncomfortable. One day, during a particularly tense phone call, my mom said something that stopped me in my tracks. She's not the same person you remember, she said. You're clinging to the idea of who she was, not who she is now. Maybe she's not the same, I replied. But neither am I. And that doesn't mean she's not still my sister. The line went silent for a moment, and when my mom spoke again, her voice was quiet. I just don't want you to get hurt. It's too late for that, I said. The hurt already happened. But now I have a chance to make things right, and I'm not going to waste it. Rebuilding my bond with my sister wasn't easy, but it was worth every difficult conversation and every tense family gathering. I could see how much she was trying to atone for her mistakes, trying to be better, trying to reconnect with me. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was finally starting to get my sister back. The fallout with my parents was messy and painful, but I refused to let their disapproval stop me. They had made their choice, and now I was making mine. After 10 long years, the day finally arrived. My sister was being released from prison. The days leading up to it had been a whirlwind of emotions for both of us. She was nervous about starting over, worried about how the world had changed in her absence. I was anxious about what her release would mean for our family and how we would navigate the road ahead. On the morning of her release, I woke up early, barely able to sleep the night before. I drove to the correctional facility, my heart pounding with anticipation. The gates loomed ahead as I pulled into the parking lot, the reality of what was happening hitting me all at once. She was coming home. When she stepped out of those gates, I barely recognized her at first. Dressed in a plain shirt and jeans, her hair longer than I had ever seen it, she looked both older and younger at the same time, weathered but hopeful. The moment our eyes met, tears spilled down both our faces. It's over, she said, her voice trembling as she wrapped her arms around me. I can't believe it's finally over. The ride home was quiet at first, both of us lost in our thoughts. She stared out the window, taking in the world that had changed so much in the years she had been gone. It feels surreal, she said after a while. I kept imagining this day, but now that it's here, I don't know what to do with myself. You don't have to figure it all out today, I told her. One step at a time. You've got me, and we'll figure it out together. She smiled weakly, her eyes filling with gratitude. Thank you for being here, she said. For everything. I don't deserve it, but I'm so glad I have you. You do deserve it, I said firmly. We all make mistakes. What matters is what you do now. She stayed with me for the first few weeks, easing her way back into a world that felt both familiar and foreign. At first, even simple things overwhelmed her, going to the grocery store, setting up a bank account, learning how to use a smartphone. The world didn't stop while I was gone, she said one day, her frustration evident. It kept moving, and I feel like I'm trying to catch up. You will, I reassured her. It just takes time. You've already done the hard part. You survived. As the days passed, she began to settle into a routine. She found a part-time job at a local coffee shop, thanks to a friend of mine who was willing to give her a chance. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start, and she threw herself into it with determination. Every paycheck feels like a victory, she said one evening, holding up her first stub with a grin. It's not much, but it's mine. Our time together wasn't without its challenges. There were moments when the weight of the past caught up to her, regrets about the choices she had made, guilt over the people she had hurt, and fear about whether she could ever truly move on. I think about them sometimes, she admitted one night, her voice heavy. The people I hurt. I wonder if they've forgiven me, or if they even think about me at all. You can't control how they feel, I said gently, but you can control what you do now. You're not that person anymore. She nodded. wiping away a tear. I just want to make things right. Even if I can't fix the past, I want to be better. Hearing her say those words filled me with hope. She was trying, and that was all I could ask for. As she adjusted to life on the outside, our bond grew stronger. We spent hours talking about everything we had missed: family holidays, milestones, and the little moments that made up the fabric of our lives. "I've missed so much," she said one day, her voice tinged with sadness. "But I'm glad I didn't lose you forever." "You didn't," I said. "We have a lot of time to make up for, but we'll get there together." Her release brought its own set of challenges, but it also brought a sense of closure. The decade of lies and loss was behind us, and for the first time in years, I felt like we were moving forward. The days and weeks after my sister's release were a whirlwind of emotions and adjustments. For her, it was about finding her place in a world that had moved on without her. For me, it was about navigating the complicated web of relationships that her return had disrupted. My parents, who had spent a decade perpetuating the lie of her death, were cautiously supportive of her return but avoided addressing the elephant in the room. Every interaction with them felt like walking a tightrope, balancing my anger at their betrayal with my desire to rebuild some semblance of family unity. One evening, after a particularly awkward family dinner, my dad pulled me aside. "I know you're still angry with us," he said, his voice heavy with guilt. "I am," I admitted, "but I'm more disappointed than anything. You didn't just lie. You took away my choice to be there for her." He nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping. "We thought we were protecting you, but I see now that we were wrong. I'm sorry. I just hope someday you can forgive us." I didn't respond right away. Forgiveness felt like a distant goal, something that might come with time, but not easily. "I'm trying," I said finally, "but it's going to take a while." My sister, on the other hand, was relentless in her determination to rebuild her life. She threw herself into her job, started taking night classes at a community college, and even began volunteering at a local shelter. "I spent so long taking from people," she said one evening as we folded laundry together. "It feels good to finally give something back." Her growth was inspiring, but it wasn't without its challenges. There were moments when the weight of her past threatened to drag her down. Memories of the people she had hurt, the relationships she had destroyed, and the 10 years she could never get back. "Do you think they'll ever forgive me?" she asked one night, referring to the victims of her crimes. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but forgiveness isn't something you can control. All you can do is live your life in a way that shows you've changed." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I just hope it's enough." As my sister worked to rebuild her life, our relationship deepened in ways I hadn't expected. We spent hours talking about everything: our childhood, the years we had missed, and the dreams we still held for the future. "You've always been stronger than me," she said one day as we walked through the park. "That's not true," I replied. "You survived 10 years of hell and came out the other side. If that's not strength, I don't know what is." Her eyes filled with tears, and she smiled. "I wouldn't have made it without you," she said. "Even when I thought I'd lost you, the memories of us kept me going." Her words brought a lump to my throat. Despite everything, the lies, the grief, the years apart, we had found our way back to each other. The real challenge, though, was reconciling her return with the rest of the family. My parents struggled to accept her presence, their guilt and shame manifesting in awkward conversations and forced smiles. "They're trying," my sister said one day after a strained family dinner. "I know it's not enough, but it's something." "It's more than they gave me for 10 years, I said bitterly. She placed a hand on my arm, her eyes full of understanding. "I know you're hurt, but holding on to that anger won't help. If I can forgive them, maybe you can too." Her words stayed with me, and while forgiveness didn't come easily, it started to feel possible. As the months turned into a year, my sister's life began to stabilize. She moved into her own apartment, found a full-time job, and started to dream about what her future could look like. "I want to do something meaningful," she said one day over coffee. "Maybe work with at-risk youth or help people avoid the mistakes I made." I smiled, proud of the person she was becoming. "I think you'd be great at that," I said. Her journey wasn't easy, and there were still moments of doubt and struggle. But she faced each challenge with courage and determination, proving to herself, and to me, that she was capable of building a better life. In the end, my sister's return brought a lot of changes to our family. My parents and I are still on shaky ground. I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive them for their lies, but my relationship with my sister is stronger than ever. She's not the same person she was before, and neither am I. But we've both learned how to move forward, how to build something new from the wreckage of the past. The real lesson? Secrets and lies might seem like the easy way out, but they only create more pain in the long run. The truth, no matter how messy or difficult, is always worth facing. And for the first time in years, I feel like we're finally free.